begin.
Okay, well, thank you for that lovely introduction. So what I'm going to be, a little bit more background about Alelo and what we do. So we teach communication skills around the world. That is teaching language skills, teaching cultural skills, teaching interpersonal skills. We provide training to learners in the United States as well as around the world. So an understanding of culture and the impact of the design of our systems is critical. So what we'll be talking about is you'll see an interesting intersection of technology and culture and learning. So I'm going to focus today on what we're doing using technology to teach culture, particularly teaching culture in the military. And you might ask, well, why is it important in the military to have an understanding of culture? And the reason is that people in the US military work with people in other countries around the world constantly. So for example, the Pennsylvania National Guard has a state partnership program with Lithuania. So they're sending people over to Lithuania to work with the Lithuanians, training them in the latest techniques. Similarly, California has a state partnership program with Ukraine. So this means that people who go to Lithuania, they have to have an understanding of the Lithuanian culture because they are going to be working with the Lithuanians and they are going to be training the Lithuanians. So again, if you're going to be teaching or training people from another culture, you need to have an understanding of that culture so that you can be more effective in doing that. So you got a taste of one of our cultural training products, VCAT Ukraine, which we just released. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the educational methodology and design methodology behind that, and also talk a little bit about what we've done to ensure adoption of this technology. And so these are all issues that I think will be of great interest to this class. Am I right, Marcella? Am I on the right track here?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so let me pull up my slides and then we'll get started. Presenter mode. Okay, so the core technology that we utilize is AI-driven simulations where students role play with avatars in immersive simulations of realistic situations, is what the slide should say, where the situation and the behavior of the avatars reflect the culture and behavior of people in various countries. And what students gain from this is they understand the relevance and applicability of cultural competence in what they are going to do in their work. So by cultural competence, I mean the ability, not just the knowledge of another culture, which we might call cultural awareness, but the ability to apply cultural knowledge in performing tasks, in interacting with other people. So to apply cultural knowledge at a higher level in Bloom's taxonomy, if you will. We find that these simulations aid in the transfer to real life situations. And the outcomes that we're trying to achieve here, first of all, to help the students gain cognitive fluency in their cultural competence. So here's what I mean by this. Whenever you put somebody in a culturally unfamiliar situation, it is a very cognitively demanding situation. There's a lot of things going on that may be unfamiliar to the person. So they're applying a lot of cognitive resources just to try to understand what's going on, what people are doing, why their people are doing it. But as you gain cognitive fluency, basically you are automatizing this cultural knowledge so that you can apply it without a lot of cognitive effort, and that frees up cognitive resources for your main task, be it training or negotiating or what have you. So acquiring cognitive fluency is very key for our learners. We're hoping to achieve retention, because we have a situation, obvious, in many cases, where people are learning about the culture before they go overseas. And then when they get overseas, they have to apply what they learned previously. So retention is critical, and self-confidence is also critical. So we're looking at affective learning outcomes as well as cognitive learning outcomes here. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One is, if learners gain self-confidence, then they're going to be more effective in applying what they learn. And they will come across to the people they interact with as being more confident in what they do. And so that's going to help them in their job, be it one of training or preparing for disaster response, what have you, the tasks that our trainees are preparing for. Now, we actually learned this and started developing this approach early on when we started developing immersive games for people deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. Basically, we created games in which you role-played a soldier or a Marine in the country that you're being deployed to, and you had to apply your language and culture and interacting with avatars in the virtual scenario. So here, for example, is a quote from a retired Army colonel I met, who learned Arabic using our tactical Iraqi game before going to Iraq. And he found it so effective that when he later on took a battalion to Afghanistan, he had everybody in his battalion train to learn Pashto or Dari using our tactical Pashto or tactical Dari games. So they're learning the language, they're learning the culture, they were learning to be more culturally confident, acquired cultural fluency. And so this had the effect of helping the soldiers build trust, and it really made progress toward peace and stability. That what Colonel Wilson observed is, before he arrived, there were like multiple insurgent attacks per day. By the time they left, it was down to like 1 or 2 per month. So it's really a dramatic example of how cultural competence and cultural training can have a real impact on world affairs, basically. And Dan commented what he found the technology to be more so effective is, he said, what makes Alelo product so powerful is that you practice in realistic situations. When you experience it for real, you feel like you have already done it before. So this example of the self-confidence having direct impact in promoting transfer to real life. So you all had a chance to take a look at one of our courses, VCAT Ukraine. And Ukraine is a very interesting case of where cultural knowledge has a real impact on your ability to work effectively with people in that country. So Ukraine has a complex history. It was part of the Soviet Union, part of Russia for many years. And a result of that is that how you interact with people can unintentionally imply attitudes that you might have toward Ukraine, toward Russia, And that can have an impact on how people respond to you. So, so this comes up, for example, one of the videos in the course you saw, a service member who discusses the importance of using Ukrainian place names. So this is an interesting case. Prior to Ukrainian independence, we in the United States used Russian place names for cities in Ukraine. So we would call Kyiv, Kiev, we would call Lviv, Lvov. So Americans unintentionally might go into Ukraine, use the Russian place names, and that immediately gives a negative impact on the part of the people that you're interacting with. It unintentionally gives the impression that you're somehow biased against Ukraine culture. So this is part of what people have to learn. They have to acquire cultural competence so that they're not inadvertently using the wrong pronunciation. Also, a factor here is how do we convey to people the importance of what we are teaching? So in this case, we interviewed a soldier who had spent quite a bit of time over there. And one thing that we've learned is that to get this information across, first of all, it's important to rely on stories. So these videos that talk about the culture from a first-person perspective are extremely important. Also, from somebody who clearly has experience that the trainee would respect. So this here is a senior enlisted man. He's clearly had a lot of experience, knows what to do. And so the trainees will naturally look up to this kind of person and understand and take in what they are saying. So these are some examples. You know, you may have seen, you know, some videos in VCAT Ukraine, but you have to understand that there were design decisions behind that, what those videos would be about, what they would be conveying, who would be doing the conveying. That is all part of the learning design.
Louis, I have to pause real quick because you said
Sure.
something important, and it was a design decision. And I want you to explain, you said we wanted to rely on narratives.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to convince someone that this training is important, and you've made the design decision in your training to rely on narratives when
Mm-hmm.
you could have decided to rely on graphs or, you know, statistical analyses or whatever the case might be. And there's an important decision that you made there. Can you explain why it is that you are focusing on narratives?
As I see it, and in our experience, narratives, if you will, take the lead in this type of learning or presentation. So you have to convince people that what you're telling them is important and something that they can relate to and something they can relate to emotionally. And so narrative achieves all of that. Once you have laid that groundwork, then you can present statistics, you can present evidence in support of the narrative, because basically once you have the narrative, then people will understand, well, why is that? Tell me more about that. But if you have not laid that groundwork, then it just is a bunch of dry statistics that go over the person's head. So this has really been important for us. You can go online, you can go to the CIA fact book and read up a lot of statistics about Ukraine, but someone can look at that and not take anything away from that because they don't understand how does that apply to what I am doing. One more thing is, remember, we're trying to apply this knowledge in performing tasks in country. So the narratives provide examples of how you're applying the knowledge rather than just presenting the knowledge. So that was a long answer to your question, Marcella, but I think there are a number of factors of why narrative isn't so important here. Now, one more thing to how this relates to simulations is that now you're putting the person in a narrative, and then they have to think, well, what am I going to do in this situation? So that then takes from observing how somebody else applied knowledge to how am I going to apply that knowledge. So that takes us to the learners toward cultural competence, which is our objective here.
Thank you for explaining that. I think one of the downsides in education is that we think about learning very cognitively and very dryly. And it's important for students in this class, especially as they take on their own projects, that they understand the importance of emotion and the role that emotion and affect are going to play, both in persuasion and also in the learning process.
And in presenting this. So you Shark Tankers, keep this in mind. Don't present a bunch of statistics. Present an evocative story of why your innovation is important. That will get people hooked. And then you can use the statistics to reel them in. Okay, so let's proceed a little bit further here. So what you saw in the design of VCAT Ukraine is you saw that there's a set of, if you will, lesson materials that present cultural information. You saw that was personalized based upon the particular training goals of each learner. So, you know, we ask people before they start, you know, what kind of mission are you going to be training for? Some of the missions could be providing training to partner military forces. Some of it could be training in disaster relief, humanitarian assistance. There are many types of missions that American personnel are engaged in overseas that involve working with host nations. And so then we employed a design approach where we first present the information using a combination of the stories and the statistics. And then we put somebody in a scenario where you have to apply what you learn. So one of the scenarios in VCAT Ukraine is you're meeting with your counterpart and you're going to train them about how to use new technology to help in the removal of unexploded landmines. And it's very interesting how this goes. I mean, if you haven't gone through this scenario, I really encourage it because it really kind of, it takes this issue of culture off in interesting directions. So in this scenario, you find yourself talking with your host national about Ukrainian poetry. And you might think, well, why on earth would we need to know about Ukrainian poetry in order to remove landmines? Well, that is part to convey your understanding and appreciation of Ukrainian culture, and understanding what is important about that culture from the perspective of somebody in that culture. So this relates to a term that we sometimes refer to in anthropology is an emic versus an etic perspective of the culture. So what we mean by that, and this is derived from the linguistic terms of phonemics versus phonetics. So an emic perspective is viewing the culture from the perspective of somebody in that culture, whereas an etic perspective is viewing the culture from the standpoint of somebody outside the culture, an outside observer. And it's important to be aware of this because making the transition from EDIC to EMIC is part of what you're doing is putting aside your own cultural biases, your own cultural lenses to understand the culture. So I don't know if you guys, what your attitude is about poetry, but you need to understand that from a Ukrainian perspective, the national poets have a very important voice in expression of the Ukrainian national identity. And the national identity itself is important because Ukrainians are busy, if you will, trying to develop and establish that identity. So these are all things that you need to understand when you're working with somebody in that culture. This is what's important to them about their culture. So therefore, you need to convey that to you. It doesn't matter whether you like culture, whether you like poetry or not. It's your understanding of that. And hopefully you actually might acquire an appreciation for Ukrainian poetry. Who knows? But this is all interesting aspects of, through the process of teaching culture, we learn a lot about, if you will, the structure of the culture, the meaning of culture, that again, to what we were saying before, if you just present a bunch of facts about culture, it just sort of go over your head. But if you're really trying to apply it to help people to learn to become culturally competent, it really requires a much deeper understanding of what culture is about and how it impacts design, impacts learning, interpersonal relations. It really has a number of aspects you have to take into account. So that'll hopefully give you a bit of a background. I would encourage some of you, if you have the time, you've gone through it, the VCAT Ukraine once, you might go back and take another look at it and see if you can pick out some of the design choices that I talked about and how they impacted the way we structured that information. You probably will pick up some nuances of the design that you wouldn't have noticed the first time through.
So a quick question, Louis,
yeah.
Because when I went through the VCAT, right off the bat, it had me make some choices about sort of what modules I wanted to take.
Mm-hmm.
And I may have picked the wrong ones. Yeah. And so perhaps if we can go back and relook, you might make some suggestions as to which modules we should definitely do.
Well, absolutely. I guess what I would say is that there are really two parts to it. One is working with the host nation military, and the other is the study abroad. So if you looked at one, take a look at the other.
Okay.
And then look at what the modules relating to that, and then look at the supporting learning material. So preparing for partnering with host nation military. There's a lesson before that provides background information. So look at how that was designed and presented and how it prepares you for applying what you learn. I think throughout, look for ways which we have presented things in a way that you're not just learning to understand, but you're getting ready to apply what you're learning. That really is a theme throughout. I think once you start looking for that, you will recognize, aha, they use this story here. Aha, they're talking about, host national exchange to prepare you for that.
So what you're asking them to do is to go back and look at the modules, not as a student that's learning things, but as a designer trying to figure out what types of choices you've made as a designer of how to present information, how to order information, and what types of information might be necessary for them to actually be able to apply some competence when they go out into the field.
Yeah. So in fact, let me go back to the slide at the beginning. So, I talked about, aiding and transfer to real life. So how do we promote that transfer? Gaining cognitive fluency. How do we do that? Helping learners build self-confidence. How is that achieved? So these affective and cognitive learning objectives manifest themselves in various ways as part of the product. And I think if you start looking for it, you'll start to recognize the reflection of that in the design.
Now, the issue of transfer is somewhat controversial, but it's interesting because it seems, so there's many people who argue that, transfer doesn't happen, blah, blah, blah. But you're finding that in the ways in which you've designed your technology, you are supporting transfer, and you are seeing that they are applying what they're learning to real situations. And that's what transfer means. Right. New and novel situations. What types of methods have you used? Like, are you having them engage in reflection, or are you primarily having them sort of immersed in this embodied experience?
Very good question. So it really is a combination, or rather an interleaving of action and reflection. I'll use the word interleaving because we find that if you do too much reflection in the middle of action, then it stops becoming action. And this has manifested itself in various ways. What we do want to do is to make people aware, say, of when they've made a mistake. So they'll take a case here. Let's say that, going back to the example I talked about, where you're role-playing an exchange with this Ukrainian officer, and let's say you make some sort of disparaging comment about Ukrainian poetry. Now, you might see the Ukrainian officer react negatively. You might see that he seems less willing to work with you, but you're going to have that. What we do is we have people see that reaction, and then when the scenario is done, then we reflect, okay, what happened there and why? That's the time to do reflection. So during action, be aware that there are some things that require reflection, and then reflect on them later. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I want to take a moment here because I know that many of you out there are early education. You are in educational programs. Some of you are in HCI. And whatever the case, this aspect of being a sort of, and I'm going to say reflective practitioner, but sort of the importance of paying attention to these things is paramount and universal to all the things that you are doing. And one example that I'll give is, Louis just talked about the ways in which it's important that military understand to sort of incorporate and validate the values and get to know what these people value so that they can establish these relationships and build relationships and rapport so that they can then get on with the tasks that are at hand and the learning that needs to happen. The very same thing is true in education, where as a teacher, you would want to establish the same sort of rapport with students and be able to understand what they value and also understand their culture so that you can do the same things. So I want you, as you listen to Louis, to think about it from that perspective as well.
Very good observation, yes. So let's see, how are we doing on time here, Marcella? How much time do I have left? I lost, looks like you got muted.
All right, we have about 25 minutes.
Okay, good. All right, so let me move on to the next part of what I wanted to cover with you guys, which actually, well, a couple things, just to make you aware for those of you who are interested. So we spent a lot of time talking about the cultural training. Those cultural training courses really just scratch the surface of the full technology capabilities that we have developed at Alelo. We've developed a whole platform we call N-Skill, where you can practice with avatars. Where things get really interesting is for the courses, the scenarios where you actually, we incorporate speech and language technology. So you're not just role playing, you are actually saying what somebody would say in that situation, as opposed to simply selecting from a menu of choices. So I have to tell you, I am not a fan of multiple choice items. I think that they have really had a bad influence on education. And whenever I see multiple choice items, I think, well, what's going on here? Well, part of it is you're taking away the opportunity of the learner to make their own choices. You're presenting them with a set of choices to choose from. So it is less applicative in nature. You're not applying the knowledge the same way, and you have the risk of giving the choices away. One thing that you will see, as you go through the VCAT Ukraine scenarios, is you can kind of look at the choices, and you say something about poetry, and you think, well, they probably want me to ask about poetry, although that wasn't what you had thought of before you went through it. So we like actually using speech technology, so that there we put somebody in a scenario and we just tell them, okay, respond to what that person just said, and then you're really applying what you know. So that takes the knowledge up to a higher level. Also, we're able to provide more feedback, generate more analytics on learner performance, and I won't be able to go into this in too much detail here, but I think that this has really been revelatory to me. That is, having continual access to data on learner behavior, learner performance, that technologies like this make possible. In this case, that we're constantly collecting examples of people talking, what they say, what their responses are. This provides great insight into how people learn, how people's learning trajectories. It provides us the opportunity to measure improvements in learning. A lot of things that people do subjectively as teachers in the classroom, we now can provide objective tools for measures. It really provides teachers with new insights in what their students are doing. So this is all something, if you're interested and you have further time, we can give you access to one of our English language courses, so you can actually sort of see how that's actually applying this in further detail. But what I wanted to be sure to cover is the issue of adoption. So the VCAT courses are not only are they available.
I'm going to pause here because I want you to explain what you mean by adoption.
Please. You want me to explain by it?
Yeah, because there's a canonical sort of meaning, but I don't think that's what you're talking about here. So what do you mean when you say adoption?
So that get to the point where instructors, educational systems adopt the technology as part of their learning practice, okay? It is not enough to create an innovative learning product, but the the educational organization has to recognize the value of this learning product and make the organizational changes necessary to implement and embrace that learning product. These are important questions for anybody who is developing learning technology. You might think, oh, I just create this great technology and it's obvious that it's better, that you should use it, right? Well, no, because there are all kinds of reasons why people would much rather just keep doing what they're doing, right, than adopt something new. Interestingly, we are finding the COVID crisis as being a catalyst for adoption, because people are trying, they're discovering, well, gee, the way I taught before, I can't do that anymore. I got to do something different. What can I do? So people are coming to us and saying, well, gee, we're not together in classes anymore. I need technology, and I need asynchronous technology because I'm going crazy talking in Zoom all day.
That's
Give me
right.
something that will help.
That's
and
right.
So this is now facilitating adoption.
And if I could tie that in, we were talking about systems thinking, and the educational system in and of itself, with its values, rules, and practices, and everything tied up in that system, prevent innovation, right? And so sometimes you'll get a technology that's so powerful that will disrupt that system. But right now we have a virus that has disrupted that system and has forced people to change their practices, has forced people to give up sort of certain expectations and function and do things in new ways. And so because of that, it might facilitate sort of, these new technologies to come into this disrupted system.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've seen both of these in play. So first of all, point I want to stress in terms of adoption. So the VCAT courses, like what you saw, not yet VCAT Ukraine because it's brand new, but other existing courses are now required training for U.S. defense personnel deploying to 86 countries around the world. So here's what I mean by adoption. The organization is now saying you must use this technology for training. So that took a lot of effort over a long period of time to get to that point. So prior to that point, it was available, it was optional if you wanted, but to get from that to being institutionalized, that was a big challenge. And for those of you developing learning technology, you're going to be, it's going to be a similar transition for you. You maybe start out, say, okay, here's a new technology that people can use if you want. So then how do we get it so that they're actually going to embrace it? We also saw under COVID a huge increase in the usage of our courses, so that actually the number of people registering went up 4 times when the COVID lockdown hit. And it relates to what we just talked about a moment ago, was that suddenly in-class training was no longer possible. So suddenly people were looking for alternatives. And so here the alternative was there, and people embraced it. So what are some of the factors? I would say one of the big factors for us is getting stakeholder buy-in early in the process. So what made the VCATs so effective is our sponsor, the Defense Human Resources Agency. They did something that was very smart, which is said, okay, we'll give you money to build these courses, but you have to find partners in the combatant commands who actually send people into those countries, you have to get them to commit subject matter experts to work with you, to advise you on the content, to review the content, to ultimately, if you will, sign off on the content as being meaningful and appropriate. And so the videos that you see of people in our VCAT courses, those are some of those subject matter experts that what are known as the combatant command actually volunteered their participation. This is now so critical because, and I'll be honest with you, the current political climate is not as favorable to cultural exchange as was the case in the past. But we have these stakeholders in these military organizations saying, this is really important. This is a very important program. You have to keep it going. And so now we have these advocates supporting us. So this is extremely important. So I think that as you know, of course, it's difficult in a classroom context. But if you're you know, in the context of Marcella's course, but when you're designing learning technologies in the real world, you have to think, okay, how are we going to bring stakeholders into this process so that they can then, so you have that necessary buy-in.
And can you, for everyone out there, tell them what you mean by a stakeholder?
So, well, let me give you a different example outside the military. So, one of our great stakeholders in for our English as a foreign language course is there is a program director at a university in Mexico, Universidad del Valle de Mexico in Toluca, which is about an hour outside of Mexico City. She is the head of an English language learning program at UVM Toluca, and she is a huge advocate of us, and so we're working all the time. So she puts together like teacher training, professional development materials, and she shares them with us. She teaches her, has her people, her teachers use the technology. She is a huge advocate for us within their organization for using this technology. So not only is she playing the role, of course, she's a decision maker, she is the head of that program, but she also is part of that community of practice to help disseminate and promote wider adoption of the technological innovation. So that's one example of a stakeholder. People who have been in the trenches teaching and can tell, people that you respect. It's very analogous to what I was talking about a moment ago of having these experienced military officers that speak from first-person perspective of why this is important. If you have some of those people involved in the design and then can speak to the importance of it, that can be
so if I could just summarize for the students really quickly, and again, tie this back into our systems thinking lesson. You're developing a technology and it's going to be used in a particular place and for a particular purpose. And so you want to understand who are the key and important people within that system of usage, right? And so you're going to have your users, which are going to be the people who are going to use the system. You're going to have experts within the domain that you're going to be teaching that will, be important people to consider. You're going to have people in power who are, responsible for making sure that that system is running properly. And so really you want to start thinking about and identifying who all your important stakeholders are, right?
Right. Have you guys talked about the idea of diffusion of innovation And
No, not yet.
Diffusion
That is
Cube.
coming with the disruptive technologies
All right. Well,
lesson.
and stay tuned. That's going to be very important. But part of this is the basic idea is that innovations go through an adoption curve. There are early adopters, they're kind of mainstream adopters, there are laggards. So the stakeholders we're really talking about here are the early adopters, the ones who see early on the importance of the innovation and are willing to embrace it. And again, because they're influential within their own community, they can help bring along the more laggard members of the community. So this is part of what we're talking about here.
All right. Thank you. I think that we're all on the same page.
Right. So let me see if there was, oh yes, I think this is an important thing. I alluded to it before, but I just want to go in a little bit more detail. So we really employ a data-driven development approach in the design of our systems, particularly our AI-driven learning systems. We and this is, in my view, it's really kind of a sea change in how we conceive of instructional design. So classical instructional design is where you get together a bunch of people, you build an instructional system or intervention, you deliver it, maybe you do some studies to see how well it works. But you don't really get any data on how things work until it's been delivered. So what we try to do is say, well, let's regard our learning tools to be data collection tools as much as learning tools. That basically they are vehicles for collecting data on learner behavior, on common learner mistakes. And so we are constantly utilizing that data to understand what learners are doing, what the important design considerations are, and to inform iterative design of the system. And so this is happening all the time. And it's particularly important for incorporating AI technologies into learning innovations, because AI technologies need data. And so you need to start collecting that data. And there's a bootstrapping process of starting to collect data and then use that to further refine the development of the intervention. And so we employ this all the time. I'm, you know, throughout my career, I've always been fascinated by looking at data of what students actually do. I'm continually amazed by, you know, things that students do that you wouldn't expect. And so, and it's really important as designers to really have a clear view of what students actually do. And so now that we have recourse to tools, to technology that actually capture that data and enables us to analyze the data and then use that in iterative design, I think is extremely powerful. So again, something to think about in the design of your learning interventions. Is there a way that you can incorporate data-driven iterative design into your process? It will help you get to an innovation that is going to have more better effect on your learners. So I'll just throw that out. But it's increasingly possible now that technology runs in the cloud to deliver systems that are collecting data and that you can then utilize as you go forward. Actually, I'll invite you, Marcella, to respond to that. I'm sure that some thoughts come to mind.
Absolutely. And so first of all, before you all get stressed, you're not going to actually be building the technology, but as part of this course, you will be drawing a lot of the presentations and things that we presented to propose a technology, make a pitch, and show that you can pay attention to different elements in an educational system. It will be a lot of fun because one person from each group will be a shark, and your goal will be to ask questions of each of these teams' innovations and the people to make sure whether they're paying attention to, well, how do you know that you're going to get stakeholder buy-in? How are you going to make sure that this is going to work? And one of the things that you can ask is, are you going to be collecting data and making changes iteratively? And what we say when we use the word iteratively is that, you know, way back when computer science is first coming out and people were making computers, they spent huge amounts of money building systems that didn't actually work for the people for which those systems were intended. And so they lost a lot of money. And so what started happening over time was that rather than spending huge amounts of money to build these giant things, they would build, you know, like prototypes, or they would build smaller things, and then they would test them, and they would make sort of, you know, see what was working, what wasn't working, and make minor changes, and then improve it over time, over multiple cycles of design and development. And that's what we mean by iterations, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is one of the things that, you know, we will be able to challenge each other and your peers. Really good sharks in the past have come up with some amazing questions, but all of you need to be prepared to discuss, for example, what is your plan? How are you going to make sure this is going to work? How are you going to implement this in a way where you can collect some quick data and figure out what's working? And so this is why I want you guys to all really pay attention to the things that Lewis is saying, because he's actually been through this for real. And he's laying down some wisdom which you can all use to do really well on your project.
Well, great. So I think, yeah, so at the end of my slides here, but I just a slide here to kind of summarize what we've done and what we see as the impact of that. So you know, we developed a set of capabilities in terms of AI simulations that we can make available to people anywhere, anytime, provide immediate feedback, personalized learning, automated assessment. And here are the things that we're aiming for from this. And I've actually not touched on all of them. So let me sort of go through it for, so you have the full picture here. So part of it is helping achieve rapid progress toward proficiency, toward competence. The affective benefit of students gaining self-confidence. In a blended learning setting, and we talk mainly about autonomous learning, but in a blended learning setting, what we see as the benefits are reduced workload for teachers, huge issue in the COVID-19 experience, more efficient use of classroom time. So there's an interesting benefit that if students are able to build their competencies on their own, working with the technology, when they come to class, everybody is more prepared. Everybody has a common foundation of learning. And so that then makes it possible for teachers to be able to, first of all, teachers can focus on the specific areas where the data shows the students are having difficulty, or when the students have mastered, then the teacher can help take them to the next level. So this achieves better learning outcomes, better student engagement and satisfaction. And we see that this has impact more broadly in terms of supporting larger enrollments. As more people go online, we need technology to be able to help more students get quality learning. And it can lower a lot of the costs associated with providing instruction individually to people. So I will stop there, stop my slides, and I'd be happy to take any further questions or continue the discussion as appropriate.
All right, so does anybody have any questions for Lewis? And I'll say that normally I put them into groups and have them come up with questions, because I think it's easier to do it that way than to ask it to the entire class. But, you know, just because of time, you know, anybody have questions with regards to, you know, how he has worked with stakeholders, how he began sort of, you know, presenting the materials, why he decided to go down this road, like, you know, whatever questions you might have for him.
Let me ask, I'll take one of your comments as a question, Marcella.
Okay.
So why did I go down this route of teaching culture, teaching language? So this was really kind of a career move that I made pretty early on. I was looking where a lot of technology was being applied to, like teaching mathematics and teaching sort of well-defined skills. And I thought to myself, there's really a need, an opportunity for use technology to teach competencies that people sometimes think of as soft and squishy. And culture is a good example of this. I think you will see that going through this process, that we've really kind of developed, if you will, a good conceptual framework for understanding culture, for understanding the teaching of culture, understanding the application of culture. That all comes, that's been a consequence of going through this process. And so I'm glad that it developed that way. I kind of had a feeling that technology-based interventions would really help to actually move the field forward in these areas, and I think it has.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
Because it's interesting that you're focusing on the development of cultural competence. In this class, we've been talking about culture beginning sort of locally, right? And I've been doing some work sort of looking at multicultural competence. And I wonder whether you think that the types of things that you're doing right now could lend themselves to the development of technology that might develop multicultural competence as it relates to people's understanding of race and religion and the difficult conversations that are happening right now in this country, right? So how would you engage in these types of conversations?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example that you might kind of find funny, but there's some truth behind it. So one thing that we did is looked at how this technology could help develop better intergenerational understanding, sort of how to get past the okay boomer meme or vice versa. So what we did some research in sort of what are some of the differences in the ways people of different generations react to or behave in the workplace. And so we created a role play simulation where we put people, you know, in a situation where you're interacting with somebody from a different generational background. And then we have them swap roles. Okay, now if you're the millennial or you're the Gen Z, now you play the baby boomer and see how your millennial employee responds to you. And what this teaches is the skill known as perspective taking, which we regard as fundamental, really fundamental to everything we've talked about today. About, you know, emic versus etic is how to look at a situation from the perspective of another person, to put aside your own lens and apply this new lens. This is fundamental for multicultural competence, and this is a transferable skill, I believe. If you develop the ability to engage in perspective taking, then that's going to prepare you for all kinds of issues of diversity and inclusion and multiculturalism. Once you recognize it, you discover, oh, this is everywhere. This is human nature in a diverse society having, applying perspective taking skills. So that's where I would, one example.
Nice. Okay, so one of the things I'll say, because we're getting to the end of class, Ashley says, how has this program impacted you personally, your lifestyle, interactions, etc.? Do you think this program would evolve into anything else related to education?
How has this program impacted me personally? Oh, well, I guess I've become much more aware of cultural issues through this process, and it's certainly affected how I really approach a multicultural world. I guess I find myself much more reflective of people of different cultural backgrounds and how to appeal to them. So, for example, Tuche on this call, when I first met her, I figured, oh, she's probably Turkish. She would like it if I showed some appreciation for Turkish culture.
And she did.
Yeah, that was really cool.
So that's an example of how what I've learned has, it applies in ways you wouldn't expect, but in ways that you would expect, because we are in a multicultural world. I'm just looking at the people in this class, people from a lot of different cultural backgrounds. So we could be applying these skills. You guys should apply these skills in this class. I think it will help you going forward.
Absolutely. So I want to, if all of us, we could just kind of do like a thumbs up or a clap emoji, just to thank Louis for being here today. We're so thankful that you could join us and to talk to us about your work and about sort of your approach to your work. I do want to let all of you know that Louis has kindly said that he is going to stay afterwards, as if though we were doing sort of a real talk. And if anybody would like to just, chat with him afterwards, you may. And so in order to sort of engender that, I'm going to stop recording. So that's the first thing. And so we're going to